Hello and welcome to this week's video tutorial for the iRacing Blancpain GT3 series with Virtual Racing School. The series takes us to the awesome circuit of the Americas this week, a modern F1 circuit, but one which presents a challenging mixture of high and low speed corners where accuracy is a must. I'm in the Audi R8, which I've briefly worked on to loosen up to minimise the high speed understeer, and the lap I've driven is in default morning weather with race fuel to match the official series. As ever, I'll play the lap through first in full before then going into further analysis. Okay, so that was a 2-minute 03.556. So, as ever, to start us off, we're going to select the Audi data pack from the VRS app, and we're going to scroll down to week 11, Circuit of the Americas, where obviously we've got the session details with some lap data, a replay, and a setup. On race fuel, we're going to click on Learn Track, which will open up the video analyzer, where we can see some telemetry data from the steering angle, the speed, and the brake and throttle, and of course a list of sectors. So we're going to click on sector 1 to start the lap off from the start finish line to the braking zone of turn 1. Not really much to do here, just keep the car nice and straight and think about your braking point for turn number 1. Where you can afford to brake really quite aggressively because the circuit goes quite aggressively uphill. So you can see here that I'm braking very, very hard initially and then eventually bleeding off as the grip comes away and I start to turn in. So in terms of a reference, there isn't really one here, unfortunately. But before the circuit really starts to go too steeply uphill, that's when you want to be braking hard. So we'll just slow it down and play it through. So braking very hard initially, and then just before the exit of the corner and the apex come into view, you want to bleed off the brakes and start turning in. Very easy to get your timing wrong here and brake too late, brake too early, turn in too late, turn in too early, and end up not picking up with the apex. But this was pretty good. So I picked up the apex there nicely, and then on the exit you're very heavily traction limited, you're in second gear, the circuit falls away again on the exit, so you want to pick up the throttle very progressively, open the steering up. The car actually is unsettled there slightly by the apex curb, so just be aware of that. And then bring the car over to the left hand side to set up for the right-hander of 2, which will go to sector 3 for this. And if you get your line correct on the entry, you're opening the corner up nicely, you can make it through here full throttle. And you want to use this curb on the inside. You can use a little bit more curb than that, but that's okay. And then bring the car sort of to the middle right of the circuit to set up for the next one of 3, where I'm feathering the throttle at this point just before the apex. And then you've got a series of S's, each which has its own yellow apex curb, which is very aggressive and you can't afford to hit. But you do want to get as close to these as possible. So we'll just go to sector 4 and play it through. So just before I start to turn right, I go from breathing out of the throttle to actually braking. So you want to really start shaving the speed off. Each S gets tighter and tighter. So braking before the right hander, and then again aiming for that curb on the inside. Just see we get nice and close to it there. And then kind of feathering the throttle to keep our speed fairly consistent. Again, very close to that next curb on the left hander. And then on the exit it opens up a little bit more so we can get into the throttle a bit more and actually accelerate before the right hander, where again you've got this yellow apex curb which you need to spot into sector 5. So just out of the throttle again as we turn into the throttle. So you want to hit that apex curb, or get close to it, and then allow the car to swing out slightly wide. If you're going a bit too slow for that, then just breathe into the throttle just to push the car out slightly, and then you should be bang on line to then take the curb again, and that will allow you to get back into the throttle and accelerate into the right hander just before the left hander, where you want to briefly brake as you come alongside this curb on the right hand side, and then you want to pick up with this inside yellow curb again on the left hander where it kind of drops down. Pick up with that. So I was in the throttle before, and then I'm kind of coasting as I apex, and then on the exit you can see that I pick up the throttle quite aggressively. The circuit opens up, and you really need to take advantage of that as well. The circuit also goes uphill, so the car really grips up. So you really need to take advantage of that and get into full throttle before then braking before you start turning right, where you have a very late apex. So you come into this curb early, but then you get tighter and tighter, and ideally you want to exit on the curb just here, which is going to open up the left-hander, which is quite critical to get a good exit. So we just play that through, and you'll see that I feather as I apex because the circuit just dips away here, so you lose traction. But then on the exit again you got this crest, and then eventually I get to full throttle as the car straightens up, and of course using all of this curb, but being cautious to avoid the AstroTurf beyond the curb. And then down in towards turn 11 now, just clip the curb on the left there and keep the car out wide for the braking zone into 11, where you've got the 100 marker on the right hand side with a corresponding painted white line in the AstroTurf, which is you're going to brake just before there. And the circuit is very, very wide at this point. You can brake hard initially, but because the circuit's so wide, it takes you a long time before you actually hook up with the apex, and it's very, very easy to mistime this or get this wrong. And unfortunately it's super critical as well. You need the good exit. You've got that massively long straight, so you need to make sure your line is good on the entry here to set up for the best possible exit. So I actually use an Oculus Rift, which makes this a lot easier because I can look into the apex here nice and early. So focus on your apex. That's hooked up quite nicely, a little bit wide actually, if I'm completely honest. And then picking up the throttle as I apex and being progressive as well in second gear here, so traction limited again. And then open the car up and try and get the power down nicely. We'll just speed this up. Obviously down this super long straight, time to breathe and think about your braking zone into turn 12, where again you've got some markers on your right hand side. You've got this 150 marker, which comes just before the grandstand, and again you've got a corresponding painted white line. So I'm going to brake pretty much at that line, braking hard initially, just going to slow it down and mute it again, and obviously bleeding off at the end of the braking zone. So again, on the entry the circuit's quite wide, but it's quite narrow on the exit, so you need to be very accurate with this apex curb, and quite important to actually get onto the curb this time as well, and that will allow you to pick up the throttle as you apex, which does unsettle the car ever so slightly there. You can see the car briefly bouncing around, but once it's settled you can pick up the throttle nicely and open the car up before then bringing the car back over to the left hand side into turn 13. So we just go to sector 8 for this. In terms of a braking reference, again there isn't really one here, unfortunately. Just going to have to focus on your apex and sort of feel it out, but it's quite a brief braking zone. You want to start turning in fairly early and really hold the brakes into the apex for a long time. So you're braking quite early, but it's quite brief before you bleed off as you're turning in and holding the brakes on to keep the car rotating. So hooking up with this inside curb here, picking up with the throttle just as you exit the curb, and then hugging the inside in a way that you can run over this exit curb or secondary right-hander, and then positioning here is going to be just left of middle of the circuit, and that's so that you shorten the distance to the left-hander but you don't narrow the entry more than desired. And you want to start braking here after that exit curb on the left hand, on the left side, finishes. And again, you want to be braking while turning in, so bleeding off, swinging the car out wide. You'll notice how I keep the car in a straight line, relatively speaking, and turning quite late. So again, you've got a very narrow exit and a wider entry. So you want to hook up with this apex curb, again holding the brakes all the way into the apex to keep the car rotating, to keep the front end loaded up, and then picking up the throttle as I apex, but again heavily traction limited, so it takes me quite a while to get to full throttle. Waiting for the car to settle, opening the steering up, and then again bringing the car over to the left hand side of the track to open up the sequence of right-handers, which are 16, 17 and 18. So we'll take it to sector 10 for that, and you'll see that I'm playing with the brake and throttle through this. So it's a very, very long corner. Initially you want to be on throttle, kind of breathing off, and then on the brakes to rotate the car. Before then you'll see I pick up the throttle quite suddenly, so that I'm always on the edge of traction, and that keeps the car rotating. So we just play that through. So you want to avoid the first curb, and then you've got a secondary curb which you need to take. Arguably you can take more of that. I suggest you probably should take more of that, and you want to be picking up the throttle before that as well, and hopefully the car should be rotating nicely at that point, to the extent where you can hug the remainder of the corner whilst being quite heavily into the throttle. Now again, you'll notice you need to lift out of the throttle. It really depends on how the car feels, and you can see that I'm playing with the steering throughout this whole exit as well. The important thing really is to just keep a nice tight line so that you don't end up swinging out too wide by the time you reach full throttle. So you see on the exit here I'm at full throttle and I'm close to the exit curb, but I'm not actually on it there. And then braking to what is arguably the most difficult corner on the whole circuit, turn 19, is going to be quite early. It's very easy to brake too late and turn too late and miss the apex here. But shortly after the green AstroTurf on the left hand side here finishes, or this curb here finishes, you want to be on the brakes, and it's a fairly high speed corner. On the brakes, aiming for the outside curb, so you should finish your braking on the curb on the entry out wide, which will open up the corner more, and then you've got to be nice and accurate through the apex and hook up with the curb nicely before then, so that was quite nice, before then picking up the throttle just as you apex, like that. And then on the exit you need to be cautious about running too wide. So you've got some AstroTurf on the exit, which I get very close to. I think I dropped some wheels on, but I get away with it because the corner's pretty much finished at that point. The only thing that you need to be wary of is picking up an incident point. So we just take it through to sector 12, and braking here is going to be just before this tarmacked area in the grass. Again, very easy to turn in too late for this one and miss your apex, and also to carry too much speed in. And again, it's a little bit wider on entry than it is on the exit, so just play that through. So you want to start turning in as you just pass this white painted line, bleeding off, and then using a good amount of curb. And again, you've got a yellow painted concrete curb which you want to get close to, and I'm already in the throttle before the apex here, in anticipation of my exit, where I'm in second gear, so quite heavily traction limited again, and waiting for the car to straighten up, opening the steering and then getting to full throttle to finish off the lap, which ends quite early with the start finish line right on the exit. You can find all setups, replays and telemetry for your own use and analysis on virtualracingschool.com, where you can also book one-on-one tuition with top drivers from the likes of COTA SimSport. Good luck for this week, and feel free to post any questions or comments below. Thanks for watching.